The sound of crystal glasses clinking to congratulate the new public relations director had just begun to fade when a wheezing sound rose from my throat like a broken kettle. I am Sailor Cole, an antique book restoration expert, someone far more accustomed to paper dust and silence than to lavish parties like this one. Pause for a second, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and what time it is there. I want to see how far this story travels. Earlier that evening, the Obsidian Gallery had felt less like a celebration and more like a surgical theater. It was a glass box of a building, all sharp angles and cold white light, designed to strip away secrets and leave nothing but the art exposed. My sister, Stephanie, thrived in this fishbowl. As the gallery's curator and event director, she was the centerpiece, shimmering in a gold lame dress that cost more than the restoration equipment I'd spent 5 years acquiring. I stood near a display of 17th-century frescoes I had personally stabilized, watching my parents, Joseph and Patricia, orbit Stephanie like moons caught in the gravity of a brighter planet. They were retired socialites who treated parenthood like portfolio management. Stephanie was the high-yield asset. I was the depreciation they forgot to write off. I'm a restorer. My job is to find the cracks in history and seal them with gold leaf and patience. Stephanie's job is to widen those cracks, carve them out, and sell the pieces to the highest bidder. We were fundamental opposites, bound by blood and a shared surname that felt heavier every year. I hadn't wanted to come tonight. The invitation had felt more like a summons to court than a request for company. But the conditioning runs deep. You don't realize you're being cooked when the temperature rises 1 degree at a time. You just adjust. You tell yourself the heat is normal. You tell yourself that showing up is what good daughters do, even when the air in the room is thin enough to choke on. We sat down to dinner in the main exhibit hall. The first course was placed in front of me with a flourish, golden tomato gazpacho. It was vibrant, yellow, and innocent. I had the chef make this specially for you, Grace, Stephanie said, her voice carrying that practiced, melodic concern she used when she wanted an audience. I know how anxious you get about food. This is completely safe. Just tomatoes and olive oil. Consider it a peace offering. I looked down at the bowl. My training kicked in before my emotions did. In restoration, you learn to read liquids, the way a solvent beads on varnish, the way an acid eats through paper. I watched the oil swirling on the surface of the soup. It didn't disperse like olive oil. It clustered. The viscosity was wrong, too thick, too heavy. It clung to the porcelain rim with a tenacity that vegetable fats don't possess. My brain screamed contamination. But then I looked up. My mother was watching me with a tight, expectant smile. My father was checking his watch, clearly bored by my hesitation. The pressure in the room was a physical weight. If I refused the soup, I would be the drama queen. I would be the difficult one ruining Stephanie's big auction night. The boiling frog effect isn't just about tolerance. It's about the inability to identify the moment safety turns into danger. I had spent 26 years swallowing their subtle insults, their backhanded compliments, and their neglect. What was one bowl of soup compared to a lifetime of toxicity? I convinced myself I was being paranoid. I convinced myself that for once, the golden color meant warmth, not warning. I picked up my spoon. I silenced the expert in my head, who knew better. And I took the first bite. The reaction wasn't gradual, it was a structural collapse. One moment, I was tasting the earthiness of tomatoes. The next, my throat seized shut like a rusted drawbridge. The air in the gallery seemed to vanish. I tried to inhale, but my lungs had turned into a vacuum, pulling at nothing. I stood up, or tried to, but my legs had lost their structural integrity. The room tilted violently to the left. I reached out to steady myself, and my hand swept a crystal flute off the table. The sound of shattering glass was louder than a gunshot in that acoustic fishbowl. I hit the floor hard. The cold, polished concrete pressed against my cheek. My vision tunneled, reducing the world to a series of blurry, high-contrast shapes. I could hear the wheezing sound tearing out of my own throat, a broken, mechanical rasp that didn't sound human. Then came the voices. They filtered down to me, distorted but distinct. "Oh, for God's sake," Stephanie said. Her voice wasn't fearful, it was annoyed. "Grace, get up, you're making a scene, it's just soup, Stop being so dramatic. I clawed at my neck, trying to manually force air into my windpipe. The hives were already blooming across my skin like heat maps. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was my mother, Patricia. But she wasn't checking my pulse. She was leaning close, positioning her body to block the guest's view of her convulsing daughter. She looked up at the room, wearing her best hostess smile. "It's just a panic attack," she announced, her voice smooth and practiced. "She has anxiety. Please, everyone, enjoy your dinner. We'll get her some water." She was lying. She was actively managing the PR of my death, rather than preventing it. That realization hit me harder than the lack of oxygen. They weren't just negligent, they were complicit. Then the circle of faces broke. Gregory pushed through the crowd. He didn't look like a billionaire tech mogul in that moment. He looked like a first responder. He dropped to his knees beside me, his eyes scanning my face, my swollen lips, the hives on my neck. "Anaphylaxis," he barked. It wasn't a question. He didn't wait for my family's permission. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an EpiPen. He uncapped it with a single, fluid motion and drove it into my thigh, right through the silk of my dress. The shock was immediate. A chemical flood of adrenaline surged through my system, forcing my heart to hammer against my ribs. My airway opened, just a hairline fracture, but enough to drag in a jagged, painful breath. As the oxygen hit my brain, the fog lifted for a split second. I saw the waiter reaching for the soup bowl. Stephanie was signaling him to clear the table, to erase the weapon. No. I couldn't speak. My voice was gone, but my hands still worked. With the last reserve of my strength, I reached up and grabbed Gregory's wrist. My fingers locked around the cold metal of his watchband. I squeezed. He looked down, locking eyes with me. I pointed a shaking finger at the bowl of golden tomato gazpacho. Then, slowly, deliberately, I closed my hand into a tight fist. Hold. Preserve. Do not move. It was the universal sign used in restoration when an artifact is too fragile to be touched. Gregory stared at my fist, then at the soup, then back at me. He understood. He looked up at the waiter, his voice carrying the absolute authority of a man who owned the building we were sitting in. "Don't touch that bowl," Gregory ordered. "Security. Seal this table. Nothing leaves this room." I woke up to the smell of antiseptic and the feeling of sandpaper in my throat. My vocal cords felt like they'd been scrubbed with wire wool. The silence in the hospital room was heavy. But it wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of a vacuum. I reached for my phone. It was the only lifeline I had. I expected concern. I expected panic. What I found was an indictment. 17 missed calls, 34 text messages. "You ruined the auction. Dad is furious. The investors are asking questions. The police are here. Tell them it was an accident. Do not embarrass us, Grace." Not one message asking if I was alive. Not one asking if I could breathe. I didn't cry. Tears imply a loss. And I hadn't lost anything I actually had. I had simply lost the illusion of what I wanted them to be. The parents I hoped for, the ones who would burn down a city to save me, didn't exist. The parents I had were PR managers for a burning building, worried more about the smoke damage to the curtains than the person trapped inside. Then I thought about Stephanie. Why? Why tonight? Why escalate from snide comments to biological warfare? And then, the memory surfaced. The mirror cracks. Earlier that evening, before the dinner, Gregory had walked into the gallery. Stephanie had practically lunged at him, her smile bright and predatory, holding a portfolio of her curation achievements. She wanted his validation. She needed him to reflect her own grandeur back to her. But Gregory had looked past her. He had seen me examining a microfracture in a Renaissance bust. He walked right by the golden child and spent 20 minutes talking to the invisible sister about the chemistry of lime mortar. I saw Stephanie's face in that moment. It wasn't just annoyance. It was a fracture. Narcissists don't just get jealous. They suffer a narcissistic injury. When Gregory ignored her to value me, it didn't just hurt her feelings. It threatened her entire reality. In her mind, she is the sun. If someone looks at a shadow instead of her, the universe is broken. To fix the universe, she had to eliminate the shadow. She didn't poison me because she hated me. She poisoned me because I was a glitch in her reflection. I put the phone down. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They wanted me to be quiet? Fine. I wouldn't say a word. I would let the evidence speak for me. 3 days later, I sat in the office of Arthur Lewis, the most aggressive civil litigator in the state. His desk was a slab of polished mahogany, devoid of clutter. He slid a single sheet of paper across it. Toxicology, he said. Concentrated crab essence. High molarity. This wasn't cross-contamination, Grace. This was a biological weapon. I looked at the numbers. They were damning. But in my line of work, you learn that the surface damage is rarely the whole story. You have to look at the substrate. I had asked Lewis to subpoena Stephanie's digital communications to prove premeditation for the assault. He handed me a stack of printed emails and digital logs. We have her search history, Lewis said. How to mask the taste of shellfish. Lethal dose of crustaceans. It's enough to put her away for aggravated assault. It's not enough, I said. My voice was a raspy whisper. But my mind was sharpening. I began flipping through the logs, not looking for keywords about crab, but looking for patterns. In restoration, a forgery often reveals itself not by what is there, but by what is missing. A gap in the brushstrokes, a silence in the provenance. I found it on page 14, an email thread from a G.V. Trust. It had been archived in a hidden folder on Stephanie's server. I read the subject line, Restoration Grant, the Renaissance Project. Mr. Lewis, I said, pointing to the document. What is this? He squinted at it. Looks like a standard grant application for the gallery. No, I said. Look at the addressee. It's addressed to Grace Cole. But it was sent to Stephanie's work email. I pulled the thread closer. My eyes scanned the text. It was a notification of an award. A grant for $5.5 million to establish a dedicated restoration wing. The recipient was listed as me. But I had never applied for it. Then, I saw the attachment. A mesmerizingly complex contract, signed 2 days ago. I looked at the signature at the bottom. Grace Cole. It was a good forgery. The loop of the G was elegant, the slant consistent. To a layman, it looked authentic. But to someone who spends her life analyzing ink density and stroke pressure, it was a clumsy fake. Stephanie had signed my name. She intercepted it, I realized aloud. She didn't just try to kill me because I embarrassed her. She tried to kill me because I was in the way of a deposit. I looked at the donor line on the grant. It was anonymous, listed only as the Prometheus Group. Who is Prometheus? I asked. Lewis tapped his keyboard. It's a holding company. Let me trace the EIN. He typed for a moment, then stopped. He looked up at me, his expression shifting from professional detachment to genuine shock. It's Gregory, he said. The silence in the room was absolute. The pieces snapped into place like a mosaic. Gregory hadn't just been interested in my work at the party, he had been vetting me. He had already awarded the grant. Stephanie found out. She realized that $5.5 million was about to bypass her gallery and go directly to the sister she despised. She couldn't allow that. She forged my signature to divert the funds to the gallery's general operating account, an account she controlled. But she had a problem. The donor, Gregory, would eventually want to meet the lead restorer. He would want to talk to me. Unless I was incapacitated. Unless I was humiliated, discredited, or dead. Stephanie hadn't acted out of simple jealousy. She had acted to cover up a felony. I looked at the forged signature again. It wasn't just a crime. It was a breach of contract, wire fraud, and identity theft. The parents, as board members of the gallery, would have had to co-sign the acceptance of such a large sum. I looked at Lewis. Check the co-signers. He flipped the page. There they were. Joseph Cole. Patricia Cole. They had signed it. They had helped her steal my future to fund their vanity project. This isn't a personal injury case anymore, I said, closing the file. This is RICO. Lewis smiled. It was the smile of a shark sensing blood in the water. Grace, we don't need to go to court. We own them. The mediation was scheduled in a conference room that smelled of stale coffee and expensive anxiety. My parents and Stephanie were already there when I walked in with Mr. Lewis. They were dressed in their courtroom best, navy suits, pearls, projected humility. Stephanie looked up. Her face was a mask of contrition, rehearsed and brittle. "Grace," she started, her voice trembling just the right amount. "I am so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. It was a prank. A stupid, horrible prank. I just wanted to test you." My mother nodded vigorously, dabbing at dry eyes. "She's just a girl, Grace. She made a mistake. We can't let this ruin her life. We're willing to offer you a settlement. $50,000. To cover your medical bills and stress. $50,000. The price of a car. The price of keeping me quiet while they stole $5.5 million. I didn't sit down. I didn't speak. I simply opened the file folder I was carrying. First, I slid the toxicology report across the table. Concentrated crab essence. Then, the search history log. Lethal dose. Finally, I placed the grant award letter on top of the pile. The one with the forged signature. The silence in the room changed. It went from the silence of negotiation to the silence of a tomb. Joseph picked up the grant letter. His hand shook. He looked at the signature, then at Stephanie. "You signed this," he whispered. "We all signed it," I corrected, my voice raspy but filling the room. I pointed to the cosigner lines. "Joseph Cole. Patricia Cole. You authorized the diversion of funds. You are co-conspirators in a $5.5 million fraud against a federal grant." Patricia turned to Stephanie. "You told us Grace agreed to it. You said she wanted us to manage the money." "I did!" Stephanie shrieked, the mask falling away to reveal the panicked animal underneath. "She would have wasted it. She just fixes old paper. I built this gallery. I deserve it." "The donor is Gregory," I said. Stephanie stopped screaming. Her mouth hung open. "The man you tried to impress. The man who saved my life. He gave that money to me. And when he finds out you stole it, and then tried to kill me to cover it up, I let the sentence hang there." Mr. Lewis leaned forward. "We aren't here for $50,000. We are here for a confession and a surrender. What do you want?" my father asked. He looked old. "Defeated. $1.8 million, I said. "Immediately. Liquidated from your personal assets, the gallery accounts, and the sale of your home if necessary." "That will bankrupt us," Patricia cried. "The alternative, Mr. Lewis said calmly, "is that we walk out of here and hand this entire file to the FBI. Stephanie goes to federal prison for 20 years. You both go for 10 as accomplices, and the gallery is seized by the government." I looked at my parents. I saw them doing the math. I saw the moment they realized that protecting their golden child was no longer a viable investment strategy. "We'll pay," Joseph said. "Dad!" Stephanie screamed. "Shut up!" He snapped at her. "You did this. You signed our names." "I want one more thing," I said. "Stephanie is removed from the gallery board, permanently. She is blacklisted from any administrative role in the arts. I want her gone." They signed. I watched them dismantle their lives with the same pen they had used to try and steal mine. 1 year later, the Obsidian Gallery was gone. It had been sold to a developer who planned to turn it into a high-end gym. The cold glass walls that had witnessed my attempted murder were now plastered with coming soon posters. I stood in my own studio. It was a converted cathedral, high ceilings, stained glass, and silence that felt holy, not empty. The air smelled of beeswax and turpentine. I was working on a 17th century fresco that had been damaged by smoke. It required a steady hand and infinite patience. I applied a sheet of gold leaf to a halo, watching it settle into the adhesive. It was perfect. My institute, the Grace Cole Center for Preservation, was fully funded. We had students, we had projects, and we had a reputation for saving things that others had given up on. I hadn't spoken to my parents or Stephanie in 12 months. I heard through the grapevine that they were living in a rented condo in Florida. Joseph was trying to start a consulting firm. Patricia was selling essential oils on Facebook. They had lost their social standing, their art collection, and their daughter. Stephanie was working as an event planner for a chain of mid-range hotels. She was no longer a curator. She was no longer a visionary. She was just a woman with a criminal record that had been quietly sealed as part of a settlement she could never talk about. I put down my brush and looked around the room. Revenge is often depicted as a fire, something that burns down the enemy's house. But true revenge, the kind that lasts, isn't about destruction, it's about construction. It's about taking the bricks they threw at you and building a fortress they can't enter. I had built this. I had built a life where my safety wasn't dependent on their approval. I had built a career where my value was objective, measured in restored history, not in my mother's fickle praise. The settlement money had bought the building, but my skill had filled it. I picked up the gold leaf again. In restoration, we don't try to hide the damage, we acknowledge it. We stabilize it, and then we make it beautiful. I wasn't the girl who choked on soup to please her family anymore. I was the architect of my own future. And the view from here was magnificent. If you've ever had to build your own piece from the wreckage someone else left behind, share this story. You are the architect of your own future.